Picture this. You and a few of the most talented engineers and designers in Silicon Valley want to leave and start a new company. You aim high and decide it's time to challenge the status quo of remote presentations.
My co-founder Grant had this idea of let's take on PowerPoint and let's rethink it for the remote era.
You put in the work and sift through the feedback, looking for some sign your product fits a gap in the market.
For the whole, beginning of the company, these numbers were all trash, basically. We did not have a lot of signups. Most of them didn't activate, and it wasn't sticky.
Eventually, all those late nights and hard work pays off, demand surges, and your tool starts getting traction across the globe.
We're getting millions of signups in a month now, which is crazy.
And your team's strategic application of AI only accelerates your growth.
We need to plan for a world where everything is 1/10 of the cost and twice as big, and way new capabilities come out.
Today, I speak with Jon Noronha, co-founder of Gamma, about his product management skills at Microsoft, focusing on large-scale products, and his transition into the startup realm. Also, we explore how AI is dramatically transforming the scope of what's possible. Well, welcome to the podcast, Jon. I really appreciate you joining us. I'm really excited to get into a lot of the work that you've been doing at Gamma, our work at Optimizely together. Course, just talk a little bit about what's happening in the AI world. But before I wanted to get into any of that, I really had a question to ask you. I want to talk about PlateMate. I was looking at your history and I saw you invented a new system for getting high quality data from crowd workers on Mechanical Turk, and then used it to take a photo of your lunch and then send it, and it would count your calories. Tell me more about that.
This was a project I worked on in college, which is a while ago now. But the basic idea was, could you take a picture of your plate and find out the macros in it? So calories, carbs, proteins. My original hope was AI could do this. You could take a picture of your plate and AI could tell you, oh, well, you got a chicken on the left and some broccoli on the right. That's about 400 calories. Here's what it is. But it turns out at the time, which was earlier 2000s, AI could not do that at all. It wasn't even close. There was nothing on the market. It would say, you got a pile of brown stuff on your plate, and anywhere from 0 to 10,000 calories. But ended up exploring Mechanical Turk, which for any of your listeners who don't know, is basically a crowd work platform. So it's a way for people to sign up for these little micro tasks. They get paid 10 cents to do something. And the whole reason Mechanical Turk came along was actually for training AIs down the road, Amazon's AI and other AIs. And so what would happen was, you take a picture of your plate, and then we would send that picture to Mechanical Turk and go through a series of steps or stages. So people would see a picture of your plate, and they have to draw boxes around each different food on your plate. There's a thing on the left, there's a thing on the right, it's here and here. And a different person will get a different task, which was just tell us what's in this box. So that's chicken, or that's string cheese. And then there'd be other task that would be about matching that to a food database and then sizing how much. What we found was that you could get the best results by not just asking an untrained person on the internet how many calories are in this, but breaking it down into small tasks anybody could do, like guessing how much of something there was, and then providing just a bit of computer help to then map that into something. But for sure, the whole time it was AI really ought to be able to do this. And I'm honestly surprised that nobody has made this app now in the last, say, 1 year, where I actually think AI could do every one of these tasks now.
I absolutely think they could too, especially with the ChatGPT image recognition. I mean, people are taking pictures of their, refrigerator and saying, "Hey, I'm on a keto diet. Recommend food that I should order."
Totally.
It's very interesting that you saw better results instead of asking some, just to do one particular task, but breaking it down into those smaller tasks. It's almost like when we prompt AI right now, I feel like much better, task. I'm do this one specific thing of this programming instead of write me a Next.js application. What were kind of your learnings, and how did you kind of go into how you think about automation?
I've never even thought of the connection until now, but one thing that came to mind even while we were just talking is that I think I learned how to prompt AIs from prompting humans in that project, which is that, prompting AI. I think what's weird about ChatGPT is it really feels like there's a person on the other end, which then makes you want to talk to it like it's the world expert on everything. And so you can just ask it a question, it'll give you a convincing answer. And what's amazing is that already works pretty well, but it's not how you get the most out of a tool like ChatGPT or any of these large language models. The way you get the most out is by breaking down your problems into much more concrete tasks, finding ways to sort of evaluate the performance and measure them. and chaining together a combination of AIs with regular old computer stuff to get a good outcome. And that's kind of the gist of how we built Gamma as well, now that I think about it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's a good insight because the more that you can kind of break that down, the better outcomes you're definitely going to get. That kind of brings me in. So you started your career at Microsoft, working on Bing, on image search, and now that Bing has kind of gotten a new life in itself due to its
Totally.
partnership with OpenAI, I have to ask you, what is it like to work in some of these large organizations? I've only worked in startups before. I see there's lots of different product managers. I mean, I know Microsoft has a whole plethora of products, but how does that kind of work? How do these new, as they're thinking about AI and how do we put this into everything? How do you think they're thinking about
Yeah, I like to say I worked on Bing before it was cool. I don't know if it is cool now, but it's certainly cooler. I am really amazed by Microsoft's transformation because a company of that size, and it was like over 100,000 when I worked there, probably even more now in terms of number of people. I think Bing alone was like 6,000 people working on various parts of it, which is probably bigger than any organization most people have ever worked for, right?
more people that was using it at the time?
Yeah, and like I've heard people compare these giant companies to like one of those big container ships you see on the ocean.
Yeah,
They're like they can move a lot. I mean, they just do a lot, but they're incredibly hard to steer. They turn like so slowly. Whereas like a startup is a little sailboat that can zig and zag all over the place and get where it needs to go. And so it's always remarkable when you see a big company that is capable of turning their cargo ship. Right now, Google's getting a lot of flack because they're not really turning their ship fast enough, while like little nimble OpenAI seems to be outmaneuvering them. So as a former Microsoftie, I've been proud to see kind of the transformation over there. But yeah, I think it's really hard to appreciate from the outside how these companies tick. I think overall, they're really tuned to get sort of predictable outputs out of large numbers of people. If you go back to the Mechanical Turk thing, a company like Microsoft is almost like a big Mechanical Turk operation inside. It's taking these really big, messy problems like how do we grow our revenue or how do we expand office market share, and they have this huge hierarchy of managers, 6, 7, 8 layers deep, and they're slicing up the problem into littler and littler pieces to give to everybody on the team. And so, like when I worked at Microsoft, I worked on the user experience of Bing image search. So we've already narrowed down a lot from like all of Microsoft to my little
right.
piece of it. And I was a product manager there, which means I was actually setting up work for anywhere from like 8 to 10 developers to work on, where they were working on even kind of like smaller individual pieces. That's why it's so hard to steer. To change any direction from the top, you have to get that change to cascade through like all these different levels where people are working towards different goals. And like no one person has any of the whole picture.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you're each only, that's what I always imagine. I was like, hey, you're the product manager of the checkout button. The checkout? No, just the button. Like
Yeah,
that's kind of
totally.
how I imagine it. And these different features. And then, when you have how many features in Bing, I mean, how many different product managers did you have working on that, directing how many engineers?
Hundreds with hundreds of PMs with like thousands of engineers. I think at the time I was at Microsoft, in total, there was something like 8,000 product managers, which is like
Wow.
probably close to like all the Silicon Valley startups of the last of 10 years ago, like added up together.
Well, as a product manager, you kind of are a like mini CEO in the organization, especially for instance, like at a company like Optimizely, where you came on, and I think your impacts can be a lot bigger because I know that, at first it was, just the product, then it started getting separated. How did your kind of growth from going from just a product manager all the way to VP of product at Optimizely, how did that shape your thinking of how you should bring products to market?
Yeah, so maybe to back up a little bit from my Microsoft experience. So,
Yeah.
when you're working, especially at a big FANG company as a pretty junior product manager, you're really just working on product in, I would say, like a pretty narrow way. Like my job was really just to like scope out features and hand them over to developers. And the model of Microsoft time was very much a sort of like handover model. Like you spec everything out in a very detailed product requirements doc. That could be like 20 pages or more of like very detailed description of like when you press this button, this thing will happen.
Hmm.
Part of why I wanted to join Optimizely and move to Silicon Valley was I wanted more of the startup experience. I wanted to kind of be a bigger slice of the pie, even if the pie was like a lot smaller.
Mhm.
And I also wanted to get more of that connection to the business of like, what's the actual impact I'm having? When you're working in those large organizations, it's just almost impossible to trace, even if you're doing a great job. There's just too many people involved to really understand always how your work can connect to that big outcome. So that's kind of how I ended up at Optimizely, which at the time I joined was 150, probably around like 400 at the time that I left. And I joined that product team when it was only, I think I was like the second or third product manager to join. So the team didn't even really exist yet. We were still figuring out what the role even meant. And so I started out there doing very sort of similar work to what I was doing at Microsoft, very much focused on sort of like the actual like design and development of individual features. But it turns out we just had much broader challenges with that. Like, yes, we had to build new products, but also you were there for this. We were retooling our whole go-to-market motion, and not just once,
Mhm.
but probably like 4 times from the beginning, just like,
Few times.
redoing our sales process, our pricing, our marketing channels, our messaging, our audiences. And so going through that process, I sort of learned that the product is way more than just a pile of features. It's like the features tied up with the marketing of how you talk about it, your pricing and packaging, your sales strategy, the way you even demo it. And so I realized that kind of to be successful at all in that role, I had to sort of get involved in all those pieces. And a lot of the really valuable things that I learned were from talking to people who were not in sort of just the engineering organization, but people in support or customer success or sales who were talking about here's how this product is actually landing in people's hands. Here's like the real challenges that they're seeing. Here's all the crazy hacks that we're building around it. It's a lot of what you were doing, I remember. It's just like routing around like weaknesses in the product or opportunities, we'll say, in the product to make things possible. And so, yeah, I would say working at Optimizely, which for everyone's context is a B2B company, so very different than like a consumer company. I was probably spending like between like a third and a half of my time on generally like go to market stuff rather than just
Mhm.
product stuff. And I think that was actually necessary to even be good at the product stuff, but it was also a way to have more of an impact and more of like a tangible impact on the business. And I think in doing that, that's probably also how I ended up getting promoted into roles that had me having even more of that kind of cross-functional role. It was by kind of getting involved and being able to show that impact that then I got sort of bigger challenges to work on. And there were always
Yeah.
bigger ones to be had at the startup.
Absolutely. I just remember because when I was, working, running the solutions architect team, then moving over to the marketing team, you're always there to work with a lot of the people in the go-to-market function and the, support, the success, and the hackathons. And many of the hackathon projects that worked on actually ended up becoming projects, I think, because they were solving real customer needs that of how to use the tool. Now, how do you so how do you kind of go? There's the combination of what support success is telling you. You have what the engineers are telling you. Oh, we can and can't do. That's going to have to be oh, well, that pitch is going to have to be rewritten. You have the executive team telling you, I need this thing to sell. How do you compartmentalize all of that to really deliver you know products fast?
Me back too, because now my life as a tiny startup is so different from that. It's like such different signals that we have. But first of all, I mean, I think a good product manager has to be taking in all of those signals, which just that is like almost an 8-hour day, like all those things. Like you first of all just have to stay on top of it all. So like stay on top of like all the different like use cases that you're hearing about from sales, all the different like bugs and issues being reported by support, the sort of like company strategy, which is like hopefully coming from your executive team. But let's face it, that's often like disjointed, scattered. And so you're also kind of trying to like supply it and fill it in. And then there's like your actual team's like capabilities. And so I think actually just staying up and even being aware of that whole picture is like 75% of the job. And how can you find the commonalities between enough of those things? Like the Venn diagram of like, what's in the like adjacent possible of what we can build, what are customers actually going to use, and what is the thing that you can like sell and make money off of, and hopefully that aligns with your like company vision. Otherwise you have a problem in one direction or the other. And so,
Yeah, you absolutely. And then one piece, the customers and making sure that they're happy and not churning and getting the
yeah,
features that they expect to be able to do their business. And then the new customers coming in, like, oh, this big customer needs this new feature, redo your product plan so we can get this giant deal.
totally. But there's also this question of like, how much do you chase all the new stuff you're hearing about versus just make the existing stuff work? I think that's probably like the hardest trade-off because the thing you're hearing about from customers is almost always about the thing you already have that I'm already paying for is not doing what it's supposed to do in the way that I want it. And there's like a
Exactly.
million sort of like quality of life improvements. Whereas the thing you're generally hearing from your execs and your sales team is we need new stuff. We need to expand our TAM. We need to like open up new markets. And so that's kind of like the constant dance. The ideal is when you can find something that sort of checks both of those boxes. Something that is like close enough to what customers are asking for, but also opens up something like new and sellable. But otherwise, I think it's kind of this zigzaggy thing of you have to be doing both at different times to sort of maintain your position and also go on offense.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that because I work with a lot of different companies and a lot of different organizational structures, and I'm seeing that it seems like when you have the product team working closer with the marketing team, they're more in line with what's being told to the audience, what's being marketed. So there's less of that, as you said, making sure that the customers are doing what exactly they said it was going to do.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we all know that message can drift when it
There's a bit
hits
of
into go
hope
to
that gets
market.
injected in the message along the way. Hopes and dreams. Yeah.
There's definitely that hopes and dreams that this
Yeah.
software is going to solve all of your problems, and I think that's something that's definitely a challenge. So tell me a little bit about when Optimizely was acquired, you left to start Gamma, and really kind of just left knowing that you wanted to start a new company and didn't really have, I mean, you had some ideas in your mind, but tell me that kind of like process that you went through of like, okay, I have an amazing team with me. We just got funding. What are we going to build?
Yeah. It's scary. It's fun and it's scary. You know, so the sequencing sort of things was we had the vague idea of the space we wanted to be, which
Okay.
was we really had this idea that like presentations were this interesting market. And the original reason we thought they were an interesting market was because the way the world had changed in 2020 with the pandemic. And
Mhm.
so we just had this idea that presentations are this like ubiquitous work thing. Like people are just spending hours every day either making presentations or sitting in presentations. There's an old way that we did it, which was we projected them up on the wall in a room and looked at the screen and kind of like played with our phones while somebody talked. But now we're not going into the office. We are all remote. And so now we're doing it over Zoom, which somehow manages to like suck even more than the old experience of like watching PowerPoint. And so, my co-founder Grant had this idea of like, let's take on PowerPoint and let's like rethink it for the remote era. That was kind of the general idea. It was pretty vague to begin with. And that was like enough for us to sort of like build our initial team. It's also how we raised money because at the time, I think there was a lot of excitement from investors in rethinking the future of work. There was just a really clear why now, a really clear answer to why all these like established platforms, which have been so successful, could potentially be unseated now. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of how we built that initial team. Once we had an initial team, it was originally around 6 people, including our founders. It was like, okay, well, what are we actually going to do? Like, how do you now like really tackle that vision? And so there's a couple angles. I mean, we did a lot of research early on, which just involved talking to a lot of people who build presentations about their experience. Like, tell me about the last time you made a Google Slides deck, or the last presentation that you were in where someone presented to you, and just
How
what went
how did
well,
you get
what didn't.
those meetings? How did you get those meetings? Was it just reaching out to your network? Like, hey, did you just reach out on LinkedIn? What did you do to kind of like
Yeah,
start that
first step was
process?
just our network. And, we were lucky to have well, not just lucky. We had chosen the space because everybody makes presentations. So
Okay.
coming from Optimizely, which I think to some extent struggled from not having a big enough addressable market, I wanted to work on something that like many, many people could use. Millions and millions of people could be users of. And that's why presentations really appealed to me. I just knew it was like a frequent use case. And so when it came time to like find people in my network who make presentations, it wasn't hard at all. Like I know, just I personally know hundreds of people who make presentations. All of our team could like very easily find people
Yeah,
in lots of different jobs, from like teachers to B2B sales to product managers to whatever it was. You could find people
right.
who make these things. And so we really had no trouble finding like, I think we talked to hundreds of people actually just about their experience. And not for very long. A lot of these were like 20-minute calls. Just tell me about what you did. Tell me about what was good or bad about it. And we just looked for sort of the commonalities. And we found that a lot of the same problems just showed up over and over. The biggest one was just the pain of like making slides look good. There's kind of the old expression that like don't judge a book by its cover. And with presentations, well, the theme we heard from everybody is I feel like a book being judged by my cover when I make a presentation. Like
Hmm.
I have these ideas I'm trying to express, but everyone's just looking at, like my font and my boxes and my colors and stuff. And I'm not a natural designer. This isn't something that I was ever taught how to do. It doesn't come naturally to me. Therefore, making slides is like a really stressful process. I'm like cobbling together templates from different places. And I just feel a lot of anxiety about the whole process. And there were other kind of like related problems too, like how do I structure my ideas? Public speaking is scary too. Like I'm nervous about remembering all the things to say. What was really interesting too was we talked to people in like all kinds of different jobs and roles, and the challenges were like really common between people. It wasn't like sort of the salespeople had one set of problems, but the product managers had a different set, and the teachers had a third. It was all kind of the same stuff. Like, how do I make this
Hmm.
thing look good, and how do I get people to pay attention when I talk? That was like
Right.
the gist of it. And so we started really trying to zero in on those common problems. And then most of the work kind of beyond the research was really more in prototyping. It's like, given these problems, what's the like simplest, most basic thing we could design that might solve this problem in a different way? And so we just went through like lots and lots of little sort of throwaway prototypes, often not even showing them to users yet. We were just trying to convince ourselves that this could actually be better.
So tell me a little bit about because you interviewed a lot of people. Yeah, yeah, they all are like, this kind of sucks. We don't like the
Yeah.
experience. Yet on the other side, when I'm thinking about it from a different angle, I'm like, well, there's a lot of tools out there that do these things, like PowerPoint, like especially I'm sure when you went out for investment, you may have heard some of those issues. How do you kind of wrestle with that of being like, okay, why this is more, you know, um, when you have a larger competitor that obviously isn't serving the market because you have so many people that have so many problems with it. Like,
Mhm.
how do you then approach that with the roadmap?
I'll be honest, I think we were a little naive about this in our original user research. I think our original research was all about what's the problem with the current solution, which
Okay.
we then kind of in our head drew the dotted line and said, if we just fix all these problems, then we'll have the better product and everyone will switch to us. And unfortunately, that's like never the whole reality. I think if I were doing a better job of this now, the follow up question I would have asked would be, what steps have you taken to actually solve this for yourself? Or like, there's a lot of other presentation tools. Tools like Prezi have tried to like reinvent this before. Have you considered using those? And for almost everybody, the answer would have actually been no. And I think if I had dug into that no more, we would have learned a lot more about like why not. Eventually, we did do a lot of that research, and we started to hear about like more of these problems. Like PowerPoint's a standard. My whole team uses it, and so I don't want to be weird and different by like introducing something else. And all kinds of related objections like that. I think the better we'd understand those objections early on, it might have actually altered our roadmap in the beginning. But we were new at this whole startup thing, and I think coming from a place of optimism, you almost have to be when you're starting something off. You sort of can't think too hard about all the things that'll go wrong because you would just give up too early. So you have to kind of convince yourself that there's like a pot of gold at the end if you just do it. So you
Right.
know, in many ways, we just ignored a lot of those problems and solved some of them along the way. Also, we haven't solved all of them. It's not like we've like succeeded in displacing PowerPoint yet, but we've
Yeah.
at least gotten a clear idea of how we do it.
Well, I mean, but your product has grown so much since then. I mean, it's now, you're doing websites, you're doing, a multitude of other, digital formats. Um, you know, I'm sure that's probably, but it's also good information to know. Because what I found is sometimes when digging into process of doing the product, like just even the process of doing anything, you'll see some of those nuggets that are there instead of just what the actual product, because so much of what we do is in process every day. And where
Absolutely.
those efficiencies can be added. So yeah, tell me a little bit. So you went, so the original idea, hey, we want to fix, remote PowerPoint. Um, how did you kind of, work your way into what, it's fully capable of doing today?
There's a couple twists and turns, but always in kind of the same umbrella of like rethinking PowerPoint. So, you know, based on everything we learned about these problems around sort of like formatting and making things look good, we really kind of coalesced on sort of like a tagline or a vision, which was to make building a presentation as easy as writing a document. And so, like when we actually first launched our beta, like on Product Hunt, the tagline was "Write like a doc, present like a deck." And so we kind of iterated to that over a period of like it was roughly like 2 years from starting the company to releasing that beta on Product Hunt, where we were constantly tweaking the message, coalescing our prototypes, but always with this idea of like building something in between a doc and a deck, something that,
Mhm.
didn't involve so much like dragging and formatting, but still looked like very visually polished and professional at the end of the day. And that you could like present live in a meeting or send like asynchronously for someone to read, talking of like kind of plugging into these different processes. And so, we sort of like, we had to just build out a lot. When you're competing in this productivity space with a tool like PowerPoint, it's got a million features. I mean, you open up
Mhm.
any of these tools like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, just the number of buttons you can press is like unbelievable. And so, on the one hand, that's the opportunity for kind of disrupting them. But on the other,
Mhm.
the baseline of what you have to be able to do just to like compete in the space is so high. Like,
Mhm.
if you don't have some of these basics, then why would someone use your tool versus the one they already know that can do everything? So that's in some ways part of the moat that these tools have established is just like so much feature differentiation. And so we kind of just worked doggedly to break that down with like a slowly expanding beta to validate we were on the right track. So starting with like friends and network and then gradually expanding to like a public landing page where you could sign up, where we got maybe like 1,000 people to sign up and try it out. And, never more than like, let's just say 50 people using our product in a given week, mostly as a favor, not because they really like needed it to get real work done. And actually, a lot of the way we like kind of kept our compass through that process was not even real beta testing. It was dog fooding, meaning like using the product ourselves every day and trying to convince ourselves that what we were building was better and like finding all the holes. So it was very like product development intensive. We were just building, 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 like all the way to that beta, which then kind of culminated in this launch, which was now last August. So like a little over a year ago, where we actually launched publicly with kind of like our messaging and our core onboarding, all with this sort of like story of, yeah, write like a doc, present like a deck, and like rethinking PowerPoint for this remote work era. And that did like pretty well overall. We got to be a number one product the day on Product Hunt, which was like really cool. We started to get, like thousands of signups instead of like hundreds of signups. Uh,
Nice.
so that was cool. We got like real usage. We heard a lot more feedback. We knew there was like a spark there. But at the same time, it wasn't runaway growth by any means. It's not like the product had really taken off. I would say it was relatively like flat to linear growth. On the one hand, like word was spreading, people were talking about the product. We were getting new signups every day, but most of them didn't really stick or activate. And even still, it felt like people weren't necessarily using us for real work. They were still using us. They were still trying out a new thing just to see that it was cool, and then kind of like moving on and not necessarily retaining. And so we were kind of at this crossroads where it's like we've got a glimmer of something, but we don't have proof of product market fit yet. Um, and maybe we get there by just adding lots and lots of more features, but maybe we don't. That's kind of the hard thing with these startups is there's always this kind of like trough of despair where you're at this point where you don't know if doing more is going to make it better, or if you're better off saying, this is good, but it's not great. Maybe we need to pivot to something else or just like rethink our whole approach. Because there's a lot of reasons why it was clear this was a hard business to be in. PowerPoint and Google Slides were so established. People were often like okay with good enough. It wasn't clear there was willingness to pay. So the product was still free, but we weren't charging for it yet. Luckily for us, what happened around the same time, which is basically like fall of 2022, is that AI just started to totally blow up.
Yeah.
So Stable Diffusion had come out on the image side, and Midjourney had come out. People were seeing what could be done with image generation. That's actually what really first sparked my paying attention to AI again. It wasn't even the tech side. But then also like GPT-3 had been quietly making a lot of big improvements all over the course of that summer. It was getting better at following instructions and generating longer stuff. And so we started really playing more with AI and kind of seeing what it could do, and kind of had this like realization of like, whoa, AI is good now, basically. Like,
Yeah, I know. Okay, there might actually be something here
yeah, there might be
that
something
can be
here.
productized. Yeah.
So that was like surprising. And we kind of had this like realization that our product, surely really just by luck, because it wasn't the original plan, is like the perfect canvas for AI because it's a place where you can both make a lot of text and make a lot of images and put them together. That's like the
Hmm.
simplest version of it. Presentations use all of it. And
Now
if we
instead of a
kind of,
talk to a presentation, it's prompt to presentation.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, and like what we were finding looking back at our original notes from these interviews is all these problems people were talking about were things that were like so well suited to AI. Like the pain of
Hmm.
getting things to look good, the pain of like finding the right picture to fill the slide, or shorten my big messy idea into something like concise and compelling. It turns out like the tools were coming out to do that, like right at this time. And
Yeah.
then I think it was November, so like almost exactly a year ago actually, that ChatGPT came out. And ChatGPT obviously just totally blew up as a phenomenon. And the thing that I really learned from ChatGPT most of all was it was really good at like writing and talking in different styles. Like I saw
Hmm.
someone posted online this example of like write a biblical verse about getting a grilled cheese sandwich stuck in a VCR. it had like an incredibly funny answer to that, and it was like, wow, this thing can do anything. I mean, it can like transform
Yeah.
anything to anything else. And so, yeah, like you said, like our whole thing is like transform docs to slides or create
Yep.
slides, like fill in content. So maybe there's something here. And so looking back, it was almost like this refounding moment of going back to our early stages of like making early prototypes and saying like, what can we do here? Almost throw out a lot of the assumptions we made about how to tackle these problems because the technology that can solve them is totally different than it was a little while ago. And
Yeah.
so,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, you're absolutely right. When I saw this, I was just like, this is a game changer. I hadn't coded in probably a few years.
yeah,
My team had been doing that, but I was like, I need a few months to just see this because you're right. The entire paradigm shifted of what you could do. And I was like, oh, you can give it some logic and you can, well, at the time, I thought, get good JSON. Now you can actually, with some of the
yeah,
new
yeah,
features, get structured JSON. I was like, well, the entire integration, which is what I work in, hooking all these SaaS companies together and data is, can absolutely be, hooked in there to get really repeatable results. I was really excited about that piece. You talked about the importance of dog fooding. I stress to my team so much. Like we have to be using our own product, like especially when it's so that's one of the things that I felt that we didn't do as well when we were at Optimizely. Like we didn't have the team of like 20 statisticians and like all these developers, like an entire division just on experimentation that some of our larger companies did. So it was hard for us to actually be the best user of the product. But
yeah.
because you're in like you said, something that someone does all the time, I'm sure it's probably pretty easy. But I'm sure you probably didn't get 100% adoption. How did you kind of, you know, when you're thinking about dog fooding and you're thinking about those metrics that are we getting product market fit? What are those things that you're looking at?
One thing just on the dog fooding point is at Gamma, we were also not the natural users of our own product because small startups generally don't make slides. Slides are something that happen in like bigger companies. They're sort of how like big companies talk to themselves, and also how like when you're in like a sales or like external process, how you talk to outside companies. We were a tiny startup with like no meetings and no customers. So like who would you even make slides for? Was the
Interesting. Yeah, I
question.
guess when you're a product company, I mean, I'm a small services company, but we're making
Yeah.
slides all the time because that's
Externally,
how we
right? Yeah. Yeah.
externally. Yeah.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
with those, So yeah, I could see how, yeah, when you're 6 people, it's like, yeah, we all know what's going on. Well, that's a
Yeah.
good question. So when you started Gamma and you started thinking about the remote work and the future of work, how has that been working? Are you still doing remote work? Or are you more in the
That's
office?
actually the other way in which we didn't match our customers is we have actually barely been remote over our lifetime compared to most companies. So
Okay.
we definitely started out remote just because of like the pandemic, but within about 3 or 4 months of starting the company, we actually had an office in San Francisco, and we were working
Okay.
like in person in an office for the most part. And once like COVID vaccines became more prominent, we had even sort of like more of that. Like once we could actually get the vaccine, and so we've been working in person for several years now, actually. And so yeah, we were just in some ways terrible dog fooders of our own stuff, but we forced ourselves to do it anyway. And the way we forced ourselves was we basically created like essentially like fake reasons to make presentations. So we started this tradition called Gammarama, which is basically like a weekly TED Talk where somebody has to give a TED Talk on any topic they want. You know, it could be like sewing or woodworking, or like I made one about this croissant diet, which was like a fad diet this guy started where he only ate croissants. It could be any topic you wanted, but you had to make a presentation. It had to be like a pretty good one, and you had to like kind of take notes all through the process of like what was annoying about using it to do it. And I definitely found that over like a year of doing that every week, so like 50 presentations, we learned a lot about where our product fell short. We all kind of built a lot of empathy, and we also got to like trace our progress. Like it was really clear when your turn came up again, let's say 2 months later, and some things had gotten better and some things hadn't. It took these sort of like rational problems you heard about and made them like emotional problems. Like I hate that our product doesn't let you resize images. This thing's garbage.
Mhm.
Like, we got to have
Mhm.
image resizing because like I can't make my presentation good. What am I going to do? And so honestly, that was our biggest compass before we had real users. But obviously, real users are better when you can get them for all
Yeah.
kinds of reasons. And so, because we had made all those improvements over, let's say, our first year of dog fooding, by year two, we were actually ready to have real people come on and use the product. Still at very small scale, like we would onboard 10 people in a week, and maybe one or two of them would actually continue using it after that and give us some feedback. They'd use like a
Yeah.
couple times, but we just kept trying to like increase that number by finding more people and tried to increase that percentage that would actually stick around and do something. And we interviewed all of them. And at the time, the numbers were small enough that we could just talk to them about what was going well, what wasn't going well. We would seize on any kind of like hope or promise in what they said. And also we would like really try to dig into any kind of like common problems that came up between them.
Mhm.
And that was probably like all of year two. It's probably only in like year three that we could really have quantitative numbers giving us a signal of like, oh, today we had 500 people sign up and 25 of them or 50 of them stuck around and made their first presentation.
Yeah, that's a really good quote. Like when you're thinking of like your success metrics and your adoption metrics, like, so there's always, the vanity metrics. How many people did you get there? How many people did you get signed up? Those are easy to kind of juice with go to market, pump more into marketing, but,
Mhm.
sticking around, right? So obviously one was, did they make a first deck? What are other metrics that you're actually looking at to like actually say, okay, we're actually seeing product adoption here?
Yeah, so signups was the first. It is a vanity metric, but because we didn't have a marketing team, it was actually harder to get. So like for
That's
us,
true. Yeah. If you don't have a marketing budget, I mean, if you're not
yeah.
pumping it full of paid ads. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were doing any of that. It was pure sort of like word of mouth. And so
Yeah.
because it's pure word of mouth, signups are kind of a good indicator of quality because
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
it must mean someone's actually hearing about this. And sometimes it means your message is resonating too.
Mhm.
And then yeah, activation, which for us, we basically defined as spending 10 minutes editing in the product. So we just took 10 minutes, kind of this arbitrary line to mean the difference between poking around to see what it does versus actually investing the time to make something. And so the percent of people that spent more than those 10 minutes, what kind of our activation rate, and then retention. So we didn't have paying yet. So that just meant user retention. So, given that you signed up on January 1st, were you still there on January 8th, a week later to use it?
Mm.
Or were you there on February 1st and March 1st coming back? And I should say these numbers were really low across the board. For the whole, beginning of the company, these numbers were all trash, basically. Like we did not have a lot of signups. Most of them didn't activate, and it wasn't sticky. And that's just how it works when you have a new product. You're starting from zero, especially a new sort of like consumer slash prosumer product. Like in B2B SaaS, by the time someone's in your product, they're already kind of validated as wanting it. You probably had some kind of like sales call with them. They probably came because they already had some like pressing use case they couldn't solve somewhere else. But in sort of a more consumer thing, people are coming just to check it out. They often have like a very weak intent. They already have an existing tool that works well, and you're trying to convince them that yours is better. And so it's like a very different kind of like way of looking at the metrics, I realized. But we just measured all three of those, along with some more kind of tangible like usage metrics, like how many presentations is someone making, how long are they, how often do they actually present them, how much time are they spending in our app. That's probably the best indicator for us because it is an app that you can just spend a lot of time with. Although, interestingly, once AI came around, it totally blew up that metric because you can just get more done in less time. So we can talk more about that part later.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, if you can literally create an entire presentation in like 5 seconds, that it becomes like, okay, how quickly did I get them out of the app? But they keep coming back more frequently.
Yeah. We used to have two metrics we would always track, which is like number of presentations created and number of minutes spent editing. And if you look at the two curves, they always moved like perfectly in tandem. We didn't even need both metrics because they were showing the same thing. But as soon as we launched AI stuff, they completely diverged. Like number of decks created just exploded because the AI was doing all the work, and number of minutes per user went down. And so it's like, well, is this good? This is probably good, but it's hard to rate.
So now that you're thinking, so obviously earlier this week, I think OpenAI just, released kind of some amazing new features, from larger context windows to, the ability to have these assistants that can now talk to files, the use of code interpreter with JSON. I'm just so excited about some of these features. How are you thinking about how now, this kind of really goes into your product development, knowing what, one, everyone's iterating, it seems like at light speed, and two, how to rethink how you even do from the production of it, given these amazing tools.
It is amazing, just the pace of development. Like it feels like any one of these like releases, we could have spent a couple of weeks just figuring out what to do with it and then launched it. Like I think back to where we were right before ChatGPT came out. Even just chat coming out, like we spent several weeks, actually I would say several months, just figuring out how to incorporate that. So we're almost hitting this point where there's too much happening too fast for any one company to be able to like incorporate it all or deal with it. Especially because it really, like you were talking about, you have to be hands-on with this stuff. Like, you as like a company leader as well, you can't just like declare to the team, go implement this thing. Oh, it's like, no. If you want to be successful, like you have to build up your own hands-on understanding of like what's going on with this stuff. Like, how do these work? So like, I've been reading about the whole new assistance API that like OpenAI launched. And there's like a lot there to even internalize and understand before we even think about like how to apply it to our stuff. I think we'll keep using the approach we've been using, which is like get hands-on and prototype as soon as possible. Like you have to actually use these APIs. You have to use these features to know what's possible. Also, not everything they release is actually good on the first day. Not everything is actually better. And now that we're operating at scale, like cost is a huge consideration for us. Like what can we actually do in a way that is cost feasible? Also like rate limits. Like what can we actually do at a scale of, like we're getting like millions of signups a month now, which is crazy. But it means that like our rate limits just explode whenever we incorporate a new feature. And so we have to think of that second level as well.
Yeah. Getting the scale. Those are always the problems I tell the engineers. Those are good problems to have. And then they come and they're like, oh yeah, remember those good problems?
Yeah.
They're out here.
Those good problems. I heard someone say that the definition of product market fit is getting punched in the face over and over. It's like all your all your good problems come back to haunt you at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, it is so much to just internalize about what's been changing. And OpenAI seems to be pushing the envelope pretty heavily, but have you been paying attention to much of the open source community, or do you plan on because Llama And some of these other tools, I know a lot of organizations are also looking to those for kind of going back to your Mechanical Turk instance, like instead of having one AI that just knows everything, very specific AIs that do very specific tasks. Have you started looking into any of that?
I've started to, yeah. One thing I kind of realized even before this OpenAI announcement is I've realized that like AI innovation is sort of so core to the success of our company that and sort of being able to keep up with it is so important that I spend a lot of my time just like reading about this stuff, which just means I'm on Twitter and Reddit, professionally, like following all this stuff. But I kind of realized that's just like a personal goal of mine is I want to not be surprised when these new announcements come out. Like I want to
Yeah.
know a couple weeks ahead of time what's coming. And I don't mean from like any inside information. It's more about like how can I understand enough about the technology in these companies that I can sort of like guess what they're going to do. And there's a couple things that I've learned that can help me sort of like guess what's going to happen. One, I just now learned as a general principle is everything's going to get like 3 times cheaper every 6 months. And we've sort of like been on that cadence already. Like OpenAI has been doing that with like their price cuts. Another one is like context links will just keep getting longer,
Hmm.
and the models themselves will get smarter. And all these trends will happen at the same time. And so what that means, like when we think about like 1 year out planning, is we need to plan for a world where everything is 1/10 of the cost and like twice as big, and way new capabilities come out. The other thing is that open source models are a pretty good preview of what bigger models will have. So like the big paid foundation models like OpenAI and Anthropic, they're generally like more powerful because they're so well funded. But in terms of like new features like being multimodal or having long context windows, like open source models are already kind of pioneering those ideas. And so I'm trying to spend more time just following the space. We're not yet using any open source models in our products, but I think we will soon because I'm increasingly getting the sense that if you can get the right open source model and fine tune it right, you can get similar quality to some of OpenAI's models, but at way lower cost. And also sort of like fully control your own destiny. You're not necessarily at the mercy of these models changing under you as well. So it'll definitely will be something we spend more time on.
Yeah, it's I think it's really important to think about what the different open source. I think you're right. It is an interesting preview when you're kind of like on Hugging Face and you've seen some of these extra labs. Like I'm on my PC now. I haven't had a Windows machine in forever,
Oh
so I
yeah.
can have a
Just
little
get a
bit
big
more
fat graphics
beefier.
card.
Just get a little bit beefier when I started
Yeah,
doing
yeah, yeah.
Stable Diffusion and stuff, and I was trying to just create my own little avatar and just playing around with it. I think you're absolutely right. Like you just need to be playing with these tools, see what they're capable of, see what their limitations are. Some people think it's it can do everything, and some people think like, oh, it's just not doing anything, and it's like with everything, it's somewhere in between, and you just have to
Yeah.
find out where those limitations are.
There's also this thing of
Uh,
like, just because it sucks now doesn't mean it will be bad in 6 months or a year. So like, that's kind of how we approached AI image generation in Gamma. We actually held off incorporating it compared to some of our competitors because it just wasn't very good. If you looked at like where image generation was even like 6 months ago, there's just too much weird stuff like garbled text and like weird
mhm.
hands and things like that. And so we've kind of been on the fence of it's clearly really cool and users want it, but it's not good yet. We want to have a certain quality bar. And so for us, that basically meant holding off until there was something at least good enough, which for us was Stable Diffusion XL, which like really only came out, I think like 2 or 3 months ago. But we really like rushed to start incorporating that as soon as it was possible because we know it's going to keep getting better. Like we know image generation is only going to be stronger, and all the problems people point to now, they're going to be solved over the course of not even 5 years, but like 1 year. Like weird text, weird hands, hallucination, all this stuff is going to get better. By the way, without us lifting a finger to make it better, other people are going to fix it for us.
I know, and they're all going to be available as APIs or
Yeah.
deployable models to your own servers. Yeah, I mean, if you look back to what Stable Diffusion was doing even just a year ago, when that mid journey, and I mean, I still I'll have to check out Stable Diffusion XL. I haven't checked that one out since it was released. And still, Mid Journey has given me the best
Yeah.
results. But you're right; like it is still, you can tell they're AI generated. Not everyone wants it. I've been using it more for prototyping my
Mhm.
images, So like I would send it off and then I would say, hey, these are my ideas. Because half the time when you're working with a designer, you're just like, I have an idea that I'm trying to get out
Yeah.
here, do this. And they give you like 4 options. I know those aren't like, I like the 2 from there, and you just
Mhm.
iterate. Here I can just do that iteration. Like, this is really what I want. Now make an actual cool image of that that's
Totally.
in that. So I still think it's in the prototyping design. And there's always going to be that human in the middle as well. I think that's the other thing that people, that once you use it, you understand, okay, this isn't taking my job. It's just giving me superpowers.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good way to put it. It's definitely our goal. It's actually where the name Gamma came from, even though we were thinking about AI at the start. It's like the gamma ray that zaps the Incredible Hulk and gives him his superpowers.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So I also saw that when you're at Harvard, you were a teaching fellow and you basically taught, students the basic programming with like C, PHP. For those who are watching, those were ancient
Ancient history
languages back,
languages, yeah.
the history of languages back in the day. Um, if you're in computer science right now, if you're thinking about, okay, I was, learning, what, or even I just got through with a web boot camp that now this AI can develop. It's only going to get better. How are you thinking that engineers play a role in this new world? Is it just like AI or bust, or what would you be advising the students today?
I think kind of about superpowers is right. Like, I don't think software engineering as a skill set is going away, but like, the term 10x engineer, I feel like the tools are coming to 10x yourself, like to make yourself much more productive. And so, I was never a great software engineer, and I've never been really a practicing software engineer before Gamma. Although actually now at Gamma, I code a lot because I just realized that's like a very high leverage thing in a small startup. Like they don't need someone to like tell them what to do. There's just more things to do. And so I've been kind of like building up my own coding skills, which were like very rusty. But like learning, or in my case, remembering how to code is easier than ever. There's so many tools that can help you get better at it. And so I'm looking for ways to sort of 10x my own engineering skills. Certainly things like ChatGPT. I also use a tool called Cursor, which is basically like Copilot on steroids. You can sort of
Huh.
like highlight any part of your code and say, explain what this code is doing to me, or like fill in this empty function that I just wrote a comment for. I use Copilot. Like I'm trying all of it just to see what sorts of things work and can make me better. And I'm applying that same mindset of anything I do here is going to be 10 times better next year. And so
Mhm.
how do I like position myself to understand these tools? So I think we'll still have like software engineers in 5 years, but the job's going to look way different in terms of just the day-to-day like work than it does now. And so prepare yourself for that and also like use it to get ahead. I think like a 22-year-old who's like, graduating computer science right now is way better poised to learn that stuff than somebody who's been in the field for a long time and kind of like set in our ways.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's no shortage of code that's going to need to be written. I mean, there's still, government agencies that are running stuff off COBOL. We heard in the pandemic, like
Oh my
unemployment.
gosh. Yeah.
So there's definitely no shortage. But I think the ability to do more than just programming. For instance, I think that that's the other thing that we had to come from a very specialized world, like you were, in this one specialty. But now with these tools, one of the ways that I really use it is to learn other tools, even learn my tools better. Like, how do I
Mhm.
set up my debugger so that it always works on VS Code? Like, so it
Yeah.
just enhances it. Like these little things that you'd have, I don't want to spend time Googling it. Just tell me
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
is. Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Wish you all the luck with Gamma.
Thanks, Brad. Likewise, pleasure chatting and always good to catch up.